When Randolph Carter was 30, he lost the key to the great of his dreams. Prior to that time, he had made up for the prosiness of life by nightly excursions to strange and ancient cities beyond space, and lovely, unbelievable garden lands across ethereal seas. But as middle age hardened upon him, he felt these liberties slipping away little by little, until at last he was cut off altogether. No more could his galley sail up the river Ukrainos, past the gilded spires of Thran, or his elephant caravans tramp through the perfumed jungles of Cled, or forgotten palaces with caravans, with veined ivory columns sleep lovely and unbroken under the moon. He had read much of these things as they are, and talked with too many people. Well-meaning philosophers taught him to look into the logical relations of things and analyze the processes which shaped his thoughts and fancies. His thoughts and fancies. Wonder had gone away, and he had forgotten all that life was only a set of pictures in the brain, among which there is no difference betwixt those born of real things and those born of inward dreamings, and no cause to value the one above the other. Custom had dinned into his ears a superstitious reverence for that which tangibly and physically exists, and had made him secretly ashamed to dwell on visions. Wise men told him of the simple fancies were inane and childish, and believed it because he could see that they might easily be so. What he failed to recall was that the deeds of reality are just as inane and childish, and even more absurd because their actors persist in fancying them full of meaning and purpose as the blind cosmos grinds aimlessly on from nothing to something and from something to back to nothing again, neither heeding nor knowing the wishes or existence of the minds that flicker in for a second now and then in the darkness. They had chained him down to things that are, and that explain the workings of those things till mystery had gone out of the world. When he complained and longed to escape into twilight realms where magic molded all the little vivid fragments and prized associations of his mind in abysses of breathless expectancy and unquenchable delight, they turned him instead towards the newfound prodigies of science, bidding him find wonder in the atom's vortex and mystery in the sky's dimensions. And when he had failed to find those boons and things whose laws are known and measurable, they told him that he lacked imagination and was immature because he preferred dream illusions to the illusions of our physical creation. So Carter tried as others did, and pretended that the common events and emotions of earthly minds were more important than the fantasies of rare and delicate souls. He did not dissent when he told him that the animal pain of a stuck pig with dyspeptic plowman in real life is a greater thing than the peerless beauty of Narlath. With its 100 carven gates and domed of chalcedony, which he dimly remembered from his dreams, and from under their guidance he cultivated a painstaking sense of pity and tragedy. Once in a while, though, he could not help seeing how shallow, fickle, and meaningless all human aspirations are, and how emptily their real impulses contrast with those pompous ideals we profess to hold. Then he would have recourse to the polite laughter they had taught him to use against the extravagance and artificiality of dreams, for he saw that the daily life of our world is every inch as extravagant and artificial, and far less worthy of respect because of its poverty and beauty, and silly reluctance to admit its own lack of reason and purpose. In this way, he became a kind of humorist, for he did not see that even humor is empty in a mindless universe devoid of any true standard of consistency or inconsistency. In the first days of his bondage, he turned to the gentle, churchly faith endeared to him by the naive trust of his fathers. For once, thence stretched mystic avenues which seemed to promise life, escape from life. Only on closer view did he mark the starved fancy and beauty, the stale and prosy triteness, and the owlish gravity of grotesque claims of solid truth, which reigned boresomely and overwhelmingly among most of its professors, or feel to the full the awkwardness with which it sought to keep alive its literal fact. The outgrown fears and guesses of a primal race confronted the unknown. It worried Carter to see how solemnly people tried to make earthly reality out of old myths, which every step of their boasted science confuted. And this misplaced seriousness killed this attachment he might have kept from the ancient creeds. They had been content to offer their sonorous rites and emotional outlets in their true guise of ethereal fantasy. But when he came to study those who had thrown off the old myths, he found them even more ugly than those who did not. He had not. They did not know that the beauty lies in harmony, that loveliness of life has no standard amidst an aimless cosmos save only its harmony with its dreams and feelings which have gone before and blindly molded their own little spheres. Our little spheres out of the rest of chaos. They did not see that the good and evil and beauty and ugliness are only ornamental fruits of perspective, whose sole value lies in their linkage to what chance made our fathers think and feel, and those whose finer details are different for every race and culture. Instead, they either denied these things altogether or transferred them to the crude, vague instincts which they shared with the beasts and peasants. So their lives were dragged malodorously out of pain, out in ugliness and disproportion, yet filled with a ludicrous pride at having escaped from something no more unsound than that which still held them. They had traded the false gods for fear and blind piety for those license and anarchy. Carter did not taste deeply of these modern freedoms, for their cheapness and squalor sickened a spirit-loving beauty alone, while his reason rebelled at the flimsy logic with which their champions tried to gild brute impulse with a sacredness stripped from their idols they had discarded. He saw most of them, in common with their cast-off priestcraft, could not escape from the delusion that life has a meaning apart from that which men dream into it, and could not lay aside the crude notion of ethics and obligations beyond those of beauty, even when all nature shrieked all its unconsciousness and impersonal unmorality in the light of their scientific discoveries. Warped and bigoted with preconceived illusions of justice, freedom, and inconsistency, they cast off the old lore and the old ways with the old beliefs, nor ever stopped to think that lore and those ways are the sole makers of their present thoughts and judgments, and the sole gods and standards in the meaningless universe without fixed aims or stable points of reference. Having lost these artificial settings, their lives grew void of direction and dramatic interest, till at length they strove to drown their ennui and bustle and pretended usefulness, noise and excitement, barbaric display and animal sensation. When these things palled, disappointed, or grew nauseous through revulsion, they cultivated irony and bitterness and found fault with the social order. Never could they realize that their brute foundations were as shifting and contradictory as the gods of their elders, and the satisfaction of one moment is the bane of the next. Calm, lasting beauty comes only in dream, and the solace the world had thrown away when its worship of the real it threw away, the secrets of childhood and innocence. Amidst this chaos of hollowness and unrest, Carter tried to live as befitted a man of keen thought and good heritage. With his dreams fading under the ridicule of the age, he could not believe in anything. But the love of harmony kept him close with the ways of his race and station, He walked impassively through the cities of men and sighed because no vista seemed fully real, because every flash of yellow sunlight on tall roofs and every glimpse of balustraded plazas in the first lamps of evening served only to remind him of dreams he had once known, and to make him homesick for ethereal lands he no longer knew how to find. Travel was only a mockery, and even the Great War stirred him but little. Though he served from the first in the foreign legions of France. For a while he sought friends, but soon grew weary of the crudeness of their emotions and the sameness and earthliness of their visions. He grew vaguely glad that all of his relatives were distant and out of touch with him, for they could not have understood that mental life, his mental life. That is, none but his grandfather and great uncle Christopher could, and they were long dead. Then he began once more the writing of books, which he had left off when dreams first failed him. But here too was no satisfaction or fulfillment. For the touch of earth was upon his mind, and he could not think of lovely things as he had done of yore. Ironic humor dragged down all the twilight minarets he had reared, and the earthly fear of improbability blasted all the delicate and amazing flowers in his fairy gardens. The convection of an assumed pity, a split mawkishness on his characters, while the myth of an important reality and significant human events and emotions debased all of his high fantasy into thin-veiled allegory and cheap social stature. His new novels were successful as his old ones had never been, and because he knew how empty they must be to please an empty herd, he urbanely laughed at the dreams he lightly sketched, but he saw that their sophistication had sapped all their life away. It was after this that he cultivated deliberate illusion and dabbled in the notions of the bizarre and the eccentric as an antidote for the commonplace. Most of these, however, soon showed their poverty and barrenness, and he saw the popular doctrines of occultism are as dry and inflexible as those of science, yet without even the slender palliative of truth to redeem them. Gross stupidity, falsehood, and muddled thinking are not dream, and form no escape from life to a mind trained above their level. So Carter bought stranger books and sought out deeper and more terrible men of fantastic erudition, delving into arcana of consciousness that few have trod, and learning things about the secrets of pits of life, legend, and immemorial antiquity, which disturbed him ever afterward. He decided to live on a rarer plane and furnished his Boston home to suit his changing moods, one room for each, hung in appropriate colors and furnished with befitting books and objects, and provided with sources of the proper sensations of light, heat, sound, taste, and odor. Once he had heard of a man in the South who shunned and feared for the blasphemous things he had read in prehistoric books and clay tablets smuggled from India and Arabia. Him he visited, living with him and sharing his study for 7 years, till horror overtook them one night in an unknown and archaic graveyard, and only one emerged where two had entered. Then he went back to Arkham, the terrible witch-haunted old town of his forefathers in New England, and had experiences in the dark amidst the hoary willows and tottering gamble roofs, which made him seal forever certain pages in his diary of a wild-minded ancestor. But these horrors took him only to the edge of reality, and were not of the true dream country he had known in youth, so that at 50 he despaired of any rest or contentment, and grew in a world grown too busy for beauty and too shrewd for dream. Having perceived at last the hollowness and futility of real things, Carter spent his days in retirement, and in wistful, disjointed memories of his dream-filled youth. He thought it rather silly that he bothered to keep on living at all, and got from a South American acquaintance a very curious liquid to take him to oblivion without suffering. Inertia and force of habit, however, caused him to defer action, and he lingered indecisively among thoughts of old times, taking down the strange hangings from his walls and refitting the house as it was in its early boyhood, purple panes, Victorian furniture, and all. With the passage of time, he became almost glad he had lingered, for his relics of youth and his cleavage from the world had made life and sophistication seem very distant and unreal, so much so that a touch of magic and expectancy stole back into his nightly slumbers. For years, those slumbers had known only such twisted and reflections of everyday life as the commonest slumbers know. But now there returned a flicker of something stranger and wilder, something of vaguely awesome and imminence, which took the form of intensely clear pictures from his childhood days and made him think of little of inconsequential things he had long forgotten. He would often wake calling for his mother or grandfather, both in their graves a quarter of a century. Then one night, his grandfather reminded him of a key. The great old scholar, as vivid in life, spoke long and earnestly of their ancient line, and of the strange visions of the delicate and sensitive men who composed it. He spoke of the flame-eyed crusader who learned wild secrets of the Saracens that held him captive, and of the first Sir Randolph Carter,